Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tuesdays with Teresa. Great to be with you. So, the topic appropriately is Word Made Flesh. But my interest in exploring this might be a little different than what you think. I'm not interested today to explore it from the notion of Christmas or necessarily the notion of her own relationship with Jesus or Jesus Christ. But inherent to the Word made flesh are all those experiences. So that is foundational, and that can be a topic later. My interest has to do with surrendering into the flow of God, of Source within ourselves through the beholding requests of those around us. That sounds a little complicated, but I'll get really practical with her life. Teresa had a way of becoming the Word made flesh more and more and more. And I think there is a lot of insight that she has to offer us, whether you are a lover of Jesus, whether you're not, whether you have a defined spirituality or not. There is something that can be extrapolated from her experience of the transcendent and taken to be a way that we all access the genius and the realm of possibility within ourselves. And as a preparation for this topic, I took one of my translations of her works. I have a lot of different translations and just randomly opened. And I opened to the introduction to the Interior Castle. So many of you are probably aware of the Interior Castle. It is perhaps today one of her most popular works. We have Carolyn Mace, we have Mirabai Starr, we have many devoting attention to offering new translations that are more current and relevant to the way we think and the psychology of being human today. We also have a lot of new interpretations. Because Teresa is a woman truly of her times, she uses languages that, even though it was not demeaning in her day, it was not showing a lack of self-esteem, to us it would appear to be a lack of self-esteem, to refer to ourselves as totally unworthy and poor women, and that everything is about God who is majestic. A lot of that terminology and that language doesn't quite speak to our own hearts, and especially with Western society needing over the years to focus on self-worth with great sincerity. So I'm going to take her language as it is, and then let us move forward into the Word made flesh. Let me give you a little bit of a background. When she began in her early 40s to have an incredible amount of all-encompassing unitive experiences, she was asked by confessors to write a story, write her own autobiography. And her own autobiography ended up being a whole treatment on the nature of prayer, contemplation, and union. It became something that was not just a memoir, but it became something that had a lot of insight and method into what would be the process for each person to open up in a new way so that they could experience union and live from a place of greater peace and joy and freedom. Now, for many years, the Spanish Inquisition had been going on and was going on even during this time, and she flew a bit under the radar, I would imagine, because she was so charismatic. She was also very obedient, that she didn't seem to pose too much of a threat. And she was very compliant with any of the leaders and confessors that came in and out of her life. And believe me, there were a lot of them that came in and out. Power was changing all the time, from power in the country of Spain, through localized power and jurisdiction, to power within the church, to power within the Carmelite order itself. There was a lot of upheaval and change happening, and she always looked to that power as an opportunity to further her own mission and call, and she felt personally directed that that was a form of her own obedience. Now, even though she flew under the radar with the Inquisition and was never taken in and charged, later in her life, I think she had founded 12 monasteries by then, she had a lot of women, especially affluent women, want to join and supported her vision. One woman entered the monastery and was reputed to be very holy, and in the process of living in community, discovered, and she was discovered, to not be so holy. Well, this hit her a little bit. This triggered her, and she ended up leaving the community and was actually the one that reported Teresa as suspicious to the Inquisition. So her autobiography had been taken by the Inquisition. And then on May 28th of 1977, Teresa was 62 years old. She was just talking with those around her. I think her confessor was present and perhaps some of the sisters, and she was talking about prayer. And she was ordered to write another autobiography. And this autobiography comes to us today as formerly named The Dwelling Places and now named The Interior Castle. So that gives you a little bit of a background. Now, at 62 years old, she really had no desire to be writing. She had, as you can imagine, and she's very practical, had all of these monasteries that she was in the process of helping them become stable, and her health was always poor. So I know this is a bit of story time, but I want to read for you a little bit about what her state was before she wrote this, because we consider this a masterpiece. And it's the key to the topic today of us becoming the Word made flesh. So she starts in her introduction, and I'm taking a translation, an old translation by a discalced Carmelite, Kieran Kavanagh. Not many things that I have been ordered to do under obedience have been as difficult for me as is this present task of writing about prayer. First, it doesn't seem that the Lord is giving me either the spirit or the desire to undertake the work. Second, I have been experiencing now for 3 months such great noise and weakness in my head that I found it hard even to write concerning necessary business matters. But knowing that the strength given by obedience usually lessens the difficulty of things that seem impossible, I resolved to carry out the task very willingly, even though my human nature seems greatly distressed. The Lord hasn't given me so much virtue that my nature, in the midst of its struggle with continual sickness and duties of so many kinds, doesn't feel strong aversion towards such a task. May He, in whose mercy I trust, and who has helped me in other more difficult things, so as to favor me, do this work for me. All right. So here you've got someone that's sitting down on June 2nd, I think that was 5 days after being ordered to write this Dwelling Places, sitting down to write it, and that is her inner state. What does that say to us? Do you think she's exaggerating? I don't think she's exaggerating. If you look at the history of her life, she had a lot of physical challenge in her life. And could you imagine sitting down to hours of silence and prayer and your head being in pain the entire time and thoughts constantly rolling? So here we've got someone that's a model of ecstasy, bliss, and union, going through great turmoil in her mind. And if you look at statues of anyone that seems enlightened or awakened, there's always this placid look on their faces, as though nothing is going on in here. She gives a very important lesson to us, that our being Word made flesh, that our being in the flow of Source, so that new life can come into the world, is not about us feeling completely aligned in all our faculties. In fact, even when our minds and hearts are distressed, even in those times, we could be incredible channels for new goodness in our world. Isn't that incredible? So what's important here then, I think, is how then could she be so distressed and so sick and produce such a timeless work that's inspiring and teaching people today? How could she do that? The key was obedience. Now, that's another word that we Westerners buck at, because obedience seems to have a connotation that we don't think for ourselves, that we're submissive, like sheep who have no mind or no convictions or no desires. Her teaching on obedience, mainly by modeling it, is very different than this connotation. Her obedience is a surrender to the ineffable within her. Her obedience, even though she would throw something in the fire if someone told her to do it, even though she would found a monastery or not found a monastery based on what she was told was legal, she would act in society according to the laws of society. But she was impelled by her obedience to her experience of God, of the ineffable. She was in the flow of that obedience. If you look at the Latin translation for obedience, obedere, it is to listen. That's all obedience is to listen. But to listen in such a way that in the listening itself, you're changed and you're in accord with what you hear. Think about when you have heard something that has moved you. The hearing seems to hit something that's already within. This is the obedience that she's talking about, from which the work that is timeless comes through her. And when you read her writings, she does not think that this ability to be that obedient is unique to her. She presents it as a skill that each one of us is capable of developing moment by moment by moment. So you and I are capable of developing that degree of surrender in our lives that we find ourselves consistently obedient. And obedience in that respect puts us in direct contact with the truth as it comes from within. Now, she will give witness that oftentimes it's going to lead you to be standing alone, that you'll find that you won't be understood by those around you, but it will also attract to you those that are in accord with that truth. And even though she was great and considered great, there was nothing in her that was puffed up around that greatness, because in the greatness came the vulnerable state of listening to the sounds of the divine, of God, through every creature. And it gave her the detachment to openly criticize and have strong opinions, even when it was hierarchy, where the truth she was experiencing was not aligned with what the hierarchy was asking. So even at times that she acted in accord with what she was supposed to do or not do, she would freely give her opinion as to whether she thought it was of spirit or not. This kind of obedience grants us the freedom of being so alive that we can be instruments of this greatness, of this Word made flesh coming into the world. And we have the stability, the inner stability to discern what's of spirit and what's not. And to even have opinions. If you're someone that expressing opinions is part of what your personality is. I'm I express a lot of enthusiasm for things myself, but I tend to be less opinionated. I feel as though I don't really know very much. Now, there's another Carmelite, Teresa of Lisieux, when she was asked by her prioress a trick question, and it was in community for everyone to hear, and she said, Therese, do you believe that you're humble? Now, that's kind of a trick question, because if you say yes, then it appears you're not humble. But if you say no, and it's something that you truly feel you are, you're lying. And Therese said this, yes, I believe I am humble because I have been obedient to the truth that arises within my own heart all my life. Now, that kind of humility opens us up in a dynamic way to not only be the Word made flesh, but also to receive the gift of experiencing the brilliance of the ineffable Word in every part of creation. It opens us up to go beyond the trappings of what someone looks like to come to the heart of who they are. It opens us up to go beyond the limitations of society, and society is so limited in its constructs, to dynamically engage the essence of what society is about. And it's not to blindly follow a law that is not helpful, for law is made for us, but it can allow us the freedom to navigate it and have the words and the knowing of what to do, not necessarily in the big picture, but moment by moment. So Teresa, in all of her complaints about how she felt about the writing the interior castle and how she felt and what her head was like and all the other dilemmas she had, the night before she wrote it, so June, she wrote it on the feast, if you've been Catholic, it's the Feast of the Trinity, June 2nd, 1577. And on the eve of that, unsolicited, she was in a time of meditation, and an image came to her. And the image was the entire interior castle with a flash. When have you experienced that in your life? That whether you were feeling really open or not feeling really open, but you had a flash that was not just a linear insight, but was a multifaceted, dimensional insight that was true. She had it in a flash. And what happened then on the next day is she simply, still feeling incapable of communicating the fullness of what she had experienced in this momentary flash. So she felt terrible in writing. She simply trusted that the obedience would bring out of her what was helpful. So what do you think? Do you think you could live an obedient life? Do you think framing obedience that way could open you up to a new way of experiencing Word made flesh? In her book, The Interior Castle, there are 7 dwelling places. Can you believe that she wrote about the first 5 within 1 month? She finished the work writing. People would see her writing and she would be light-filled. She didn't feel light-filled, but she was light-filled and writing furiously. She completed the work very, very quickly. So what about you? Do you think that you could let yourself, coming into this moment of this holiday, to live in obedience with even greater confidence and surrender? It's one of the vows I miss. It's interesting because as an Aries and as someone who grew up in a culture where my parents encouraged us to think for ourselves, and I went to a school that was for gifted where you were encouraged to think for yourself, everyone thought I would buck against this vow of obedience. But I had been having so many ecstatic experiences. I was aware that the vow itself would open up for me new realms of not only ecstasy, where you experience the union with the divine in a way that there are no boundaries, but it would also grant me a path where I could penetrate and experience my beloved in each task being asked of me. And it happened in the monastery. Even when I was given only 5 minutes to sweep a floor, and I knew that to do it well, it would take 10 minutes. Even something as simple as that, framed in the obedience, opened it up where the swish of the broom itself would plunge me into a dance with the beloved. And did you know, I never had an issue with sweeping the floor and not fitting within the 5-minute parameter that obedience was asking of me. How could you test out obedience in a culture that doesn't really esteem it? And again, not holding it as something that is submissive or demeaning or asking you not to think for yourself. Teresa of Avila thought for herself. It's not asking you to deny any of your natural gifts or your natural propensities in your personality. It is inviting you to harness all of that into a surrender to listen, obedere, to listen to the truth of revelation as it arises from within and as it's reflected all around you. Isn't that fun? She's pretty amazing, isn't she? So thank you for being with me. I wish you the holiest of seasons, however you may celebrate this highly energetic time. I wish you the blessing of knowing that you are never alone and that you have many friends in your journey and on your path. And I offer you the gratitude for being my friend. Blessings. Mwah.